A customer walks into a grocery store and starts yelling at an employee with Down syndrome, humiliating him in front of everyone, making fun of the way he talks, laughing at how he bags groceries. What this customer didn't know was that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was standing right behind him watching everything. And what happened next became one of the most powerful moments ever caught on camera. You're about to discover how The Rock defended this employee, what he said to that customer, and the ending that made millions of people around the world cry. Stay until the end, because what The Rock did after the cameras stopped rolling will restore your faith in humanity. Miami, Florida, March 2019. A Publix supermarket on a regular Thursday afternoon. The store was moderately busy. Families doing their weekly shopping. Elderly people buying groceries. Workers on lunch break grabbing quick meals. Normal day. Normal people. Normal routine. But in about 15 minutes, this ordinary supermarket would become the stage for an encounter that would go viral worldwide and teach millions of people a lesson about respect, dignity, and standing up for those who cannot defend themselves. The main character of this story is a young man we're going to call David, 23 years old, born with Down syndrome. David had been working at this Publix location for almost 2 years as a courtesy clerk. His job was to bag groceries and help customers carry their purchases to their cars. Simple tasks that David performed with dedication and pride. David loved his job. He arrived every day 30 minutes early. Always wore his uniform perfectly clean and pressed. Always had a smile on his face. Always greeted customers with enthusiasm. His co-workers adored him. His managers praised his work ethic. Regular customers specifically chose his checkout line because they enjoyed his positive energy. David had found his place in the world, a job that gave him purpose, independence, dignity, the chance to contribute to society, the chance to prove that people with Down syndrome can work, can be productive, can make a difference. But not everyone saw David the way his coworkers and regular customers did. Some people only saw the disability, only saw the different way he spoke, only saw someone they considered inferior, and one of those people was about to walk through the door. The customer, we're going to call him Richard, walked into the store around 2 in the afternoon, mid-40s, wearing an expensive suit, talking loudly on his phone about some business deal. The kind of person who thinks money and status make them better than everyone else. Richard grabbed a shopping cart and started walking through the aisles still on his phone, throwing items into his cart without really paying attention, acting like he owned the place. After about 15 minutes, Richard finished his shopping and headed to the checkout. There were 4 lanes open. 3 of them had shorter lines. But Richard chose the lane where David was bagging, not because it was faster, not because it was more convenient, but because he wasn't paying attention. He was still on his phone closing that business deal that was so much more important than anything else happening in the world. The cashier started scanning Richard's items. David stood ready to bag the groceries just like he had done thousands of times before. He organized the items carefully, cold products together, fragile items on top, heavy items on the bottom, doing his job exactly the way he had been trained. But David's hands moved a bit slower than other baggers. That's just how his body worked. He was thorough and careful, but not as fast as someone without Down syndrome might be. For most customers, this was never a problem. They appreciated the care David took with their groceries. But Richard was not most customers. Richard finally ended his phone call right as David was finishing bagging the groceries. And that's when Richard actually looked at David for the first time. Really looked at him. Saw the physical characteristics of Down syndrome. Heard the way David spoke when he asked if Richard needed help carrying the bags to his car. And something ugly came out of Richard. Something that reveals the worst of human nature. Instead of simply saying no thank you like a decent person would, Richard decided to make David the target of his cruelty. He looked at David with disgust and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear that he didn't want someone like that touching his groceries. Said it with venom, with contempt, with the specific intention to hurt. David's smile disappeared. He looked confused, hurt. He tried to apologize even though he had done nothing wrong. Tried to explain that bagging groceries was his job, but Richard cut him off. Started making fun of the way David pronounced certain words. Started mimicking David's speech pattern. Started laughing, making a complete spectacle of mocking a person with Down syndrome in the middle of a crowded supermarket. Drop a comment if you've ever witnessed someone being bullied like this. The cashier immediately stepped in, a young woman in her 20s named Sarah. She told Richard that his behavior was completely unacceptable, that David was an excellent employee, that he needed to apologize immediately. But Richard didn't apologize. Instead, he got angrier, started yelling at Sarah too, said he was a paying customer and had the right to be served by normal people. Actually used those words, normal people. As if David was something less than human. As if having Down syndrome made him unworthy of basic respect. Sarah called for the manager. Other customers in nearby lines stopped what they were doing. Some were filming on their phones. Some were shaking their heads in disgust. Some wanted to intervene but didn't know how. The whole situation was escalating fast. David stood there with tears in his eyes, not understanding why this man was being so mean to him, what he had done to deserve this treatment. The manager arrived, a man in his 50s named Tom. Tom had been managing this Publix for over 20 years, had dealt with difficult customers before, but he had never seen someone attack one of his employees so viciously for absolutely no reason. Tom very calmly told Richard that his behavior was unacceptable, that David was a valued employee, that if Richard had a problem with the service, he could shop somewhere else. Richard exploded, started screaming about calling corporate, about getting everyone fired, about suing the store, making threats, causing a scene, drawing even more attention. And that's when something happened that nobody expected. A voice came from behind Richard, deep, calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. The voice said, "Excuse me, sir, I think you need to calm down and apologize to this young man." Richard spun around ready to tell off whoever dared to interrupt him, and came face to face with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, 6'5", 260 pounds of muscle, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, standing right there in the middle of Publix with his own shopping cart full of groceries. The Rock had been shopping in the next lane over, had witnessed the entire incident, had heard every cruel word Richard said to David, had seen David's face crumble under the verbal assault, had watched long enough to see that this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a bad moment. This was deliberate cruelty, bullying, the kind of behavior The Rock had spent his entire life standing against. And he had decided he wasn't going to just stand by and watch. The entire store went silent. Everyone recognized The Rock. Phones came out immediately. People started recording from every angle. This was about to become one of the most watched videos of the year. Richard's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock at seeing a massive celebrity standing behind him. Confusion about what was happening. Then attempted recovery as his brain tried to shift gears. He actually tried to play it cool, tried to act like everything was fine, started to say something about being a big fan, but The Rock cut him off. He wasn't interested in small talk, wasn't interested in autographs or selfies. He was there for one reason only, to defend David. The Rock stepped closer to Richard, not threatening, not aggressive, but definitely imposing. He said he had watched Richard mock and humiliate this employee for the past 5 minutes. Said he had heard Richard call David names and make fun of his disability. Said he had seen a grown man bully someone who was just trying to do his job. And The Rock wanted to know what kind of person does that. What kind of man attacks someone with Down syndrome for bagging groceries? What possible justification could there be for that kind of cruelty? Richard tried to defend himself, started making excuses, said he was having a bad day, said he didn't mean it the way it sounded, said people were too sensitive nowadays. All the classic deflections of someone caught doing something indefensible. The Rock didn't let him off the hook. He said everyone has bad days. Everyone deals with stress and frustration. But decent people don't take that out on innocent workers just trying to do their jobs. Decent people don't mock disabilities. Decent people don't humiliate others to make themselves feel superior. He told Richard that David comes to work every single day with a smile on his face despite living in a world where people like Richard treat him as less than human. That David works hard, takes pride in his job, and deserves respect just like any other employee. That having Down syndrome doesn't make someone less valuable or less worthy of dignity. And that Richard should be ashamed of himself. The entire speech was calm. No yelling, no profanity, no threats. Just pure moral authority. The Rock wasn't using his celebrity status to intimidate. He was using his platform to educate, to call out cruelty, to stand up for someone who couldn't fully defend himself. And everyone in that store felt it. You could see it on people's faces. The respect, the admiration, the understanding that they were witnessing something important. Richard's face turned red. He looked around at all the cameras pointed at him, realized that this moment was being captured forever, that his cruelty was now public record, that he had been called out by one of the most famous people on the planet, and he completely deflated. Richard mumbled something that might have been an apology. The Rock said that wasn't good enough. Said Richard needed to look David in the eyes and apologize sincerely. Needed to acknowledge the hurt he caused. Needed to actually mean it. Richard turned to David. The contrast was striking. David still had tears in his eyes, still looked confused and hurt, but he was standing tall. The Rock had his hand on David's shoulder, offering support, solidarity, protection. Richard finally said he was sorry, said he was wrong, said he shouldn't have said those things. It wasn't the most eloquent apology. It wasn't particularly heartfelt, but it was an apology. And David, in a display of grace that shamed Richard even further, said it was okay, said he forgave him, said he hoped Richard would have a better day. The Rock then did something that made the moment even more powerful. He turned to David and asked if he could give him a hug. David nodded, and The Rock wrapped this young man with Down syndrome in a bear hug right there in the middle of Publix. Told him he was doing an amazing job. Told him to never let anyone make him feel less than he was. Told him the world needed more people like him who faced challenges with positivity and courage. Told him he was an inspiration. And David, who had been crying tears of hurt, was now crying tears of joy. The entire store erupted in applause. Customers were clapping. Employees were wiping tears from their eyes. Even some of the people recording were getting emotional. The Rock then turned back to the crowd. He said this moment should teach everyone a lesson, that how we treat people when we think nobody important is watching reveals our true character, that every person deserves respect regardless of their abilities, appearance, or circumstances, that parents need to teach their children to be kind and inclusive, that employers need to create opportunities for people with disabilities, that society needs to stop seeing differences as deficiencies. He said David had just shown more character and grace in 5 minutes than most people show in a lifetime, and that we should all strive to be more like David, more forgiving, more positive, more willing to see the good in others even when they've hurt us. What do you think should have happened to Richard? Let me know in the comments. The Rock then did his own shopping, checked out in David's line, made sure David bagged his groceries, chatted with him the whole time, asked about his favorite movies, told stories from movie sets, made David laugh, treated him like a friend, like an equal, exactly the way every customer should treat every employee. When The Rock finished checking out, he asked Tom, the manager, if he could take a photo with David. Tom said absolutely. They took several photos. The Rock, David, Tom, Sarah the cashier, and several other employees, all smiling, all celebrating this moment. The Rock posted the photos on his social media that evening, told the whole story to his millions of followers. The post went viral immediately. But here's the part that most people don't know. The part that happened after the cameras stopped rolling. The part that shows who The Rock really is when the spotlight isn't on him. He asked Tom for David's schedule, said he wanted to do something special. Tom gave him the information. The next week, The Rock's team contacted the Publix corporate office. They arranged for David to visit the set of The Rock's next movie. All expenses paid. Flight, hotel, everything. David got to spend an entire day on a real movie set, met the cast and crew, watched scenes being filmed, had lunch with The Rock in his trailer, got a tour of the studio, received signed memorabilia, felt like the most important person in the world. But The Rock didn't stop there. He reached out to several organizations that advocate for people with Down syndrome, made substantial donations, used his platform to raise awareness, started speaking publicly about the importance of inclusion and respect for people with disabilities. He said meeting David had impacted him deeply, had reminded him why he worked so hard to be a positive role model, had reinforced his belief that true strength isn't physical. True strength is how you treat people who can't do anything for you, how you defend those who can't defend themselves, how you use your power and influence to make the world better. The video of The Rock defending David was watched over 200 million times across various platforms. It was shared by celebrities, politicians, activists, and regular people around the world. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. People praised The Rock for using his celebrity for good. People shared their own stories of family members with Down syndrome. People discussed the importance of treating service workers with respect. People debated how to create more inclusive workplaces. The conversation sparked by this one incident in a Florida supermarket reached every corner of the globe. Richard, the customer who started this whole situation, also went viral, but for very different reasons. People identified him, found his social media, his business, started leaving reviews and comments. His company released a statement saying Richard no longer worked there. His reputation was destroyed. Some people felt this was too harsh, that he had apologized and shouldn't be permanently punished for one bad moment. Others felt it was exactly what he deserved. That cruelty has consequences. That being held accountable isn't the same as being unfairly punished. The debate raged online for weeks, but the real lasting impact was on David himself. Suddenly he was famous. People came to that Publix specifically to meet him, to shop in his line, to tell him how much his grace and forgiveness inspired them. David handled it all with the same positive attitude he brought to work every day. He didn't let the fame change him. He kept showing up, kept bagging groceries, kept smiling at customers, kept being exactly who he was. His managers said he inspired the entire staff, that his example of perseverance and positivity made everyone work harder and treat customers better, that having David on the team made them all better people. The story also sparked a broader conversation about employment for people with disabilities. Statistics show that people with Down syndrome face unemployment rates over 70% despite being capable of working many jobs. Companies often overlook them during hiring. Society often underestimates their abilities. But David proved what advocates had been saying for years. People with Down syndrome can work, can be valuable employees, can contribute to their communities, can live independent, fulfilling lives. They just need opportunities. And people like The Rock, using their platforms to highlight these issues, help create those opportunities. Publix Corporate responded to the viral moment by announcing new initiatives. They partnered with organizations that help people with disabilities find employment. They created training programs for managers on inclusive hiring practices. They featured David in a company-wide video about diversity and inclusion. They used this moment as a catalyst for positive change throughout their entire organization. Other retail chains took notice, started implementing similar programs. The ripple effect from one encounter in one store spread across the entire industry. The Rock continued his relationship with David. They stayed in touch. The Rock invited David to movie premieres, sent him birthday messages, checked in regularly. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was genuine friendship. The Rock said David reminded him of what really matters in life, that success and fame mean nothing if you don't use them to help others, that the most important thing anyone can do is make someone else feel valued and respected. That defending David that day in Publix wasn't heroic. It was basic human decency. And he wished more people would do the same when they witness injustice. David's parents gave interviews thanking The Rock for defending their son. They said David had faced bullying and discrimination his entire life, that seeing someone as famous and powerful as The Rock stand up for him was incredibly meaningful, that it validated their son's worth in a way nothing else could. They said they wished they could protect David from every cruel person in the world, but they couldn't. So having someone like The Rock step in when they weren't there meant everything. They said the incident also opened doors for David, created opportunities they never imagined possible, and they were grateful beyond words. Several years have passed since that day in Publix. David still works there, still bags groceries with the same care and pride, still greets customers with his signature smile. The initial frenzy of attention has died down. Life has returned to normal. But David knows he's not alone, knows that people around the world saw his story, knows that The Rock has his back, knows that what happened that day mattered, changed things, made a difference. And he's proud of that, proud that his story helped other people with Down syndrome, proud that it taught people about respect and kindness, proud that he got to be part of something bigger than himself. The Rock occasionally references the incident in interviews. says it remains one of his favorite memories, not because of the fame or the viral moment, but because he got to make a real difference in someone's life, got to use his platform for something meaningful, got to defend someone who needed defending. He says meeting David taught him as much as he taught anyone else that day, taught him about resilience, about grace, about maintaining positivity in the face of cruelty, about the strength it takes to forgive someone who's hurt you. He says David is one of the strongest people he's ever met, and he's honored to call him a friend. This story teaches us several critical lessons. First, how we treat service workers reflects our character. These are people doing honest work. They deserve respect regardless of their position or abilities. Looking down on someone because they bag groceries or serve food or clean buildings says everything about you and nothing about them. Second, disabilities don't define worth. David has Down syndrome, but that's not all he is. He's a dedicated worker, a kind person, someone who brings joy to others, someone who deserves dignity and respect. Third, standing up for others matters. The Rock didn't have to get involved, could have finished his shopping and left, but he chose to use his voice and platform to defend someone who couldn't fully defend himself. That choice made all the difference. Fourth, grace and forgiveness are powerful. David had every right to be angry, to hold a grudge, to refuse to accept Richard's apology, but he chose forgiveness, chose to move forward. That doesn't mean what Richard did was okay. It means David refused to let bitterness consume him. Fifth, our actions have consequences. Richard thought he could mock and humiliate an employee without repercussions. He was wrong. The incident followed him, cost him professionally and personally, served as a reminder that cruelty isn't consequence-free. Sixth, representation matters. When people see someone like David working successfully, it changes perceptions, opens minds, creates opportunities for others. Seventh, we all have the power to make a difference. You don't have to be the Rock to stand up for what's right. You just have to be willing to speak up when you see injustice. Today, when you go shopping, when you interact with service workers, when you encounter someone who seems different from you, remember David's story. Remember that every person deserves respect, that disabilities don't diminish worth, that kindness costs nothing but means everything, that how you treat people when you think nobody's watching reveals who you really are, and that standing up for others isn't heroic. It's simply the right thing to do. The world needs more people like The Rock who use their power to defend the vulnerable, but it also needs more people like David who face cruelty with grace, work hard despite challenges, and forgive those who hurt them. This was the true story of how The Rock defended an employee with Down syndrome from a cruel customer in a Florida Publix. A moment that went viral worldwide. A moment that sparked important conversations about respect, disability, and human decency. A moment that changed lives. Drop a comment telling me what you think about what The Rock did. Tell me if you've ever witnessed someone standing up for someone else like this. And subscribe to the channel for more true stories that inspire, educate, and restore faith in humanity. Thanks for watching.